Welcome all to this meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee. First,
camera's not on.
Sorry. Morning all, sorry about that. Welcome this morning to the Governance and Audit Committee. First item on the agenda is apologies. We've received apologies from Councillor James, Councillor Matthew, Councillor Bev. We've also received apologies from Emma Palmer, CEO, and Anne Phillips, Head of Finance, and Matt Perry, Chief Officer Place, will be joining us as soon as possible. He has got another meeting ongoing at the moment. We then move to the next item on the agenda, which is the election of the chair. Just for committee to be aware, the chair must be an independent or lay member. There are no restrictions on reappointing the current chair should the committee wish to do so. We have received a nomination for Lynn Hamilton to continue as chair. Can I have a proposer?
Propose.
And I'll take John as proposer and Councillor Graham as seconder, if that's okay. Okay, are there any other nominations? If not, can we proceed to a vote for committee members? Now you can either raise your virtual hands or put your video on and raise your hand. Okay, I'll take that as a unanimous vote, and therefore Lynn Hamilton has been duly elected as chair for the ensuing year. We then move to item 3, which is the election of vice chair. The vice chair can be an independent or lay member or a councillor. There are no restrictions again on reappointing the current vice chair, should the committee wish to do so. We have received a nomination for John Broughtgum to continue as vice chair. Can I have a proposer and a seconder?
Propose.
Thank you, Councillor Graham. Thank you, Councillor Gareth. Are there any other nominees? No. Okay, can I take a vote from committee members, please? Okay, thank you very much. Take that as unanimous, and therefore resolve that John Broughtgum is duly appointed as vice chair for the ensuing year. Can I hand the responsibility back to the chair, Lynn, for the rest of the meeting?
Thank you very much, Kath. And first thing to do is thank Governance and Audit Committee members for the trust that they've placed in me by re-electing me as chair. It's a responsibility that I take very seriously, and I do appreciate being re-elected. So thank you very much for that. Before I move on to agenda item 4, just some by way of some opening remarks, just to remind everyone that we lost the June meeting quite appropriately because we were in the pre-election period. So Kath and I have had to be quite ruthless about focusing down on the agenda for today. And as many people in the room will be aware, we also have finance panel this afternoon. So we've got a very, very busy day ahead of us. So I really do want to the committee to try and help ourselves by sticking to time if we possibly can for this meeting, so that we all get a break, those of us who will go to finance panel later. So from the perspective of officers whose support we're extremely grateful for in this committee, could officers remember that committee members have read the papers, and you should work on that assumption. And if you would focus in when you're making your opening remarks on points of change, points of potential controversy, and the real issues and guidance that you are seeking for the committee, so that we can maximise the time available for committee members to seek the necessary assurances that that is the purpose of the committee. But thank you very much for re-electing me as chair. I do appreciate your trust in me. I'll move to Item 4, which is disclosures of interest. Are there any disclosures of interest in connection with today's agenda? I'm not seeing any hands, therefore I will move to agenda item 5, which are the minutes of our April meeting. I'm going to take any points of correction, clarification and matters arising to those minutes. So could I have any questions? I can see Councillor Peate's hand. Councillor Peate.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And firstly, could I just offer my congratulations to both yourself and John on your re-election. Very pleased to see both of those reappointments. I just wanted to touch on item 5, the minutes around the Red Dragon, please. I just want to express my immense frustration and disappointment that there is no specific item on the agenda today in relation to compensation for the subcontractors on the Red Dragon project, as I was led to believe there would be at our last meeting way back in April. At that meeting, I asked that the council consider reimbursing subcontractors, as they could not be expected to pay for the council's multiple failings, especially the absence of the project bank account. Indeed, Chair, you asked for a paper to come to committee to explain in detail the council's response about compensation and to set out the exact legal position covering all matters. In addition, the risk of the subcontractors using the swap report to mount a legal challenge against the council was raised. What did we end up with? We ended up with an extremely brief briefing note that was only circulated to this committee on Tuesday, and I don't even know who the author of that briefing note is. There is no explanation of the impact and implications of the county council's failings. So again, for example, no project account. There is just a focus in the briefing note on the contractual relationships which may or may not be compromised by county council failings, but there's no comment passed on this. How does this briefing note assess and address the implications as minuted that when identified that the project bank account was not in place, Powys County Council should have done more to ensure contractors were being paid? There's no comment on the risk raised around the swap report being used to mount a legal question, and the question, could it be used, remains unanswered in the briefing note. I also think it's quite wrong to conclude in 2.1 of the briefing note that the reasons no request for payment have been made to Powys County Council is, and I quote, presumably on the basis of legal advice received by the subcontractors, unquote. We don't know that. And if you ask me, I think a better assumption would be that the subcontractors were waiting to see if Powys County Council would do the right thing by them before having to resort to legal action. Excuse me. In conclusion, we as a Governance and Audit Committee need to be assured that all is in order. And to do that, I would ask that we consider the following. Does this briefing note address all the issues as we requested? Does it explain why the lack of a project bank account doesn't trigger a claim for compensation? Surely we cannot rely on a defence of, and again I quote, optimism bias, which is defined in the minutes as, and again I quote, the council were optimistic that the project would be delivered without any significant obstacles, and so the importance of progressing the project bank account diminished, unquote. The subcontractors relied on us to do things properly and as we promised. They didn't rely on our optimism. Does this briefing note also explain why the multiple failings in the swap report, which were classed as, and again I quote, important areas of concern, unquote, as we shall see again under item 8, and why they cannot be used, that swap report can't be used to mount a legal challenge? Does it assure us that both the reputational risk and financial risk of any claims have been fully addressed and that there is no need to raise a provision in the accounts for potential claims from wronged subcontractors? Indeed, section 2.4 of the briefing note, to me, implies we could pay, but there is a risk that if we do pay, we could end up paying twice. Unfortunately, just to conclude, Chair, I feel that this report is a bit of a rushed job, and so I would ask that the report is rewritten to address these points and brought back to our next meeting. However, I fear that the patience of subcontractors has run out and they won't wait any longer. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pete, and I do appreciate how strongly you feel about this, and regrettably, this was one of the items that didn't make it onto the agenda, not least because we lost the June meeting, given our tightness for time, and that is extremely regrettable. And the hope had been that we could have discharged this with an explanatory note, because we lost the agenda item, not least because of the timing issues with losing the June meeting. Can I suggest that the important and serious issues that you raised, Councillor Pete, are taken in the first instance outside of this meeting, and then we will look at whether it's appropriate to have another agenda item or not. Jane, would it be appropriate for you and perhaps some other of the senior officers, please, to meet Councillor Pete specifically on this issue, because it is important. It is an issue of public interest and of learning for the future conduct of our contractual relationships. But for today, regrettably, we can't spend a lot of time in this, but I do not diminish the importance of the issue, Councillor Pete. But Jane, is it possible to take this offline in the first instance and then bring it back to a public meeting as appropriate going forward?
I think that's probably appropriate, Chair. I think there was a lot of content in Councillor Pete's questions, and I think we need to have that discussion, capture them correctly, and be able to respond to each and every point with sufficient information and detail as required by Councillor Pete. So I suggest that is probably the best course of action. Thank you.
Pete, given where we are, would you be happy to take it forward on that basis, please?
Yes, I would, Chair, and so thank you and Jane for the responses there. I think if I may just a couple of comments around it, because obviously it does potentially impact some of my constituents, for example. I don't think there was anything particularly new in what I said today, so I would be happy to have another meeting, but I don't think there are any new points really. And I just off the back of that, bearing in mind my previous comment that I think subcontractors may have been waiting to see what might have happened at this committee. Can we share the briefing note externally, or is that just for this committee? And then whilst I will be happy to have that meeting, it may not potentially forestall any further actions from subcontractors, if that makes sense. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Jane, please can you take away the question that Councillor Pete asks about sharing the note more widely? I'm assuming you'll need to talk to the monitoring officer about that before that can be decided. But thank you, Pete, for raising this. Jane, thank you for your response. And I make the offer to attend a meeting alongside Councillor Pete, if that would be helpful to Councillor Pete, or if it would be helpful to Jane. I'll at your disposal should it be in the least bit helpful to have me in attendance at the meeting. My personal focus would be good governance and assurance in line with the committee's remit and agenda. That would be my focus. Pete, final word.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Chair. And yes, I'll be more than happy to take you up on your kind offer. So thank you.
Right, okay, thank you very much, and thank you both. We're still on the minutes under agenda item 5. Are there any other matters arising, points of clarification or correction on the minutes, or are we happy to agree the minute from our 18th of April meeting? Okay, I think on that basis that the minute of the 18th of
Chair.
April. Sorry, I'm hearing someone's voice. Is it Councillor Graham?
No, Councillor Chris.
Chris.
Oh,
I see your hand now, sorry.
Sorry, Chair. Obviously, I don't want to prolong the discussion of this part. Item 9 on there mentions about cyber attacks on the, and whilst there wasn't a cyber attack of sort last week, there was an outage which impacted on a number of systems affecting health and authorities across the board. I just wanted to seek assurance that none of our systems locally were impacted, and are we going to be looking for the lessons learnt from the situation to improve our resilience and infrastructure moving forward?
Thank you very much, Councillor Chris. Jane, can you deal with that one, please?
I can, thank you, Chair. Yes, I can confirm that there was no impact on the council or any of the systems that we actually operated as a result of that day. As soon as we all saw or started to see the media, we were quickly on it to understand whether there was any impact, but there wasn't. So I'm pleased to report that. And absolutely, every incident that happens, we take the learning from it, because as you'd appreciate, that threat is a fast moving threat. So it's really important that we keep ourselves up to date.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. So the minutes are agreed, and we can move on to our colleagues from Audit Wales to lead us into agenda item 6 and agenda item 7, the audit plan for this year and the Audit Wales programme of work and timetable, which is their routine item. So if Audit Wales colleagues, Emma, if you could lead us off.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chair. Probably the points of detail that I need to go through are on page 26 and 27 of your pack. So on page 26, we note there that as a result of our audit planning, we've got one significant financial statement risk, which is in relation to management override. And then the other areas of focus for our work will be the pension fund net liability, valuation of land and buildings, senior officer remuneration and related party disclosures. In terms of the performance audit work, we'll be looking at the assurance and risk assessment, and then local pieces of work are the follow-up of the planning work that we did, I think it was a year ago or 2 years ago now, and the corporate safeguarding review follow-up. One thing that I should point out to you is in terms of materiality, we base this on your last year's signed accounts. So you were 550 million, and so then materiality for this year, or our planning assumption, is a 5.5 materiality and a reporting threshold of 275,000. So any bits over 275,000 that we find, we'll obviously report them back to Governance and Audit Committee via our what we call ISA 260 report. There are 2 other areas which we place additional or a lower materiality on, if you like, because they're what we class as material by nature. And those are the remuneration disclosures, which is £1,000, and related party disclosures, which are £10,000. I don't propose to go through the detail of those risks because it was in the report, but obviously I'm more than willing to take any questions. And the final point on the plan really is our fee for this year. So our fee, the top of the range, is £449,359, but happy to take any questions that members may have.
Thanks very much, Emma, and your colleague Tom, who's with us as well today. Any questions from members? Firstly, on agenda item 6, which is the Audit Wales audit plan for this year. Councillor Pete.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and yeah, thanks for that, Emma. I was just looking at it's page 28 in the pack, headed up significant financial statement risks, and it talks about the risks there of management override of controls, and in the response, it sort of focuses on financial transactions, journal entries, accounting estimates, etc. I guess though behind management override, it could be other things beyond those particular items which could have a financial impact. So I just wanted to understand how broad that review of an override of controls are beyond financial. And I guess, for example, if there was a whistleblowing report which could be suppressed and it could have cost us money, you know, how do we identify and find that particular override of controls which could have a financial impact? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you,
Okay.
Councillor Pete. Emma, could you?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Pete. I suppose from the Audit Wales perspective, as it says in the plan that we've put before you, we're required to provide an opinion on the truth and fairness of the accounting statements. So our checks or controls that we would undertake are very much akin to what's required to ensure that those statements are true and fair. So we're limited to those transactions that are taking place as a result of or what's in the financial statements. However, I think it's important to recognise that we're just one cog in the wheel. So we come at the back end of the process, if you like, in terms of accounting standards. But obviously, you will have internal audit who undertake internal control activity reviews. So, you know, potentially Ian may wish to come in to talk about that.
Thanks very much, Emma. I will bring Ian in, and then perhaps Jane, in her capacity as Section 151, may also want to comment. And then I'll bring you back in, Pete, and then I'll go to John. Ian?
Thank you, Chair. Just to comment, the role of internal audit is to look at all aspects of activity of the authority. So we can look at everything and on all the controls associated with that. Clearly, we don't look at everything because that is vast and we don't have the capacity or the resource to do that. And so therefore we have a risk-based approach in terms of control. In terms of management override, we would expect, you know, if we found that to report that as part of the normal reporting process. But if we found that that was being influenced in any way, I have the right to report to the Chief Exec, to the Chair of the Audit Committee and the Audit Committee to express any items that I feel are overrided and not being dealt with appropriately. So I have those powers. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Jane, do you want to add anything to that? And then I'll bring Pete back in.
I will, if I may, Chair. I think in terms of that management override possibility risk, as is stated, obviously that risk is inherent in any company or any business. In addition to the internal audit work that Ian undertakes, there are a number of general things that help prevent that. The first would be in terms of declarations of interests of any of the management team. Our senior leadership team all have to declare any interests each year, and that is reported on. There are the general segregation of duties and so on that are in place, various systems and processes where you have people that requisition and approvers then that approve. There's those whole sets of roles and responsibilities defined across the organisation. Myself, as the statutory officer, I have that legal responsibility from that perspective. And of course, all officers are bound by professional and ethical integrities as well. So I am fairly comfortable that the relevant assurances are there across all of those things. I think from a governance and audit perspective, you know, the whistleblowing policy was mentioned, and I know you have set up a working group to look at that in a bit more detail. And again, that will give you another level of assurance in terms of the processes in place. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Pete, Pete, can you, I'll bring you back in, and then I'm going to go to John and then Councillor Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, it's just a couple of observations, I suppose. I guess just if I simplified it for myself, being a simple guy, I guess listening to Emma, it's Emma's role is to make sure that the £10 in the accounts is backed up by journals, etc., etc., etc. And Ian's job is to make sure that it should be £10 in the first place and not £9 or £11. And then Jane's got all the extra bits around it. So if it's as simple as that, that was making sense to me. I guess the only extra comment I would probably just add around what you said, Jane. I understood all what you said there, but a lot of that seemed to be relying again upon people doing what they're asked to do or people doing what they're supposed to do. And we all know when we get to elements of fraud that collusion comes into play and other things like that. But that was just the assurance I was trying to seek. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for your question, Pete, and thanks, colleagues, for answering that. John, and then Pete. John, and then Chris.
Thank you, Chair. My query is on page 35, which is the audit fee. I'm actually delighted to see that it's not as high as we might have expected, because we were given dire warnings about the problems associated with the new financial regulations and so on. Can you actually comment as to why you've managed to keep the fee so low?
Yep. Sorry, Councillor John. I think what
I'm
it
not
is
a councillor.
oh,
Don't
sorry,
me.
John. Yeah, in terms of the fee, I think we've been doing all that we can internally to make our processes as efficient as possible. So although last year I think we highlighted about ISA 315 and there being a larger amount of planning associated in terms of risk, I think what we've been able to do this year is we've been able to cement that process. So last year we had a new audit regulations, if you like. So this year we've been able to just build on those, and I think that's aided us to create that efficiency in terms of the fee. So that's where you've benefited.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you, John and Emma. That's a slightly different line of inquiry from John's usual line of inquiry at this time of year. So that's a good one for Emma and Audit Wales colleagues. Chris, Councillor Chris.
Thank you, Chair. It's in relation to page 29, and you've got the audit risks, and it's the final paragraph on there regarding economic conditions. You mentioned that there are several legal cases potentially impacting on the value. In relation to where are those legal cases, because there's no detail there, and I was just trying to understand in which avenue are those legal cases pending, and is it the materiality levels that you were talking about that would then affect the liability to the authority?
Yeah, I think in terms of those legal cases, they haven't actually moved on, but we've got that as a hold really in case things change in the meantime. But it's just in terms of the pension, and obviously it being a really complex calculation and us relying on our own auditor experts, as we call them, that's just there really to caveat that if something changes in those legal cases, then we may need to take that on board when we're auditing the financial statements.
Okay, fine, thank you.
Thanks very much, Chris. Thanks, Emma. Councillor William.
Thank you, Chair. So I thought I was one further back in the queue. I just wanted to check on the same point, page 11 of 22 in relation to audit risk and the valuation of pension fund net liability, whether there is any additional risk caused by potential. You spoke of certain types of economic turbulence, also political turbulence in terms of some of the investment choices. Clearly, there's been a long-standing issue around fossil fuel investments and potential divestments. More recently, it's come to my attention that the Senate pension fund. It does have a stake within Baillie Gifford, which has obviously come to wider attention in the context of its activities in relation to Israel Gaza. I don't know whether there is a potential level of turbulence there that might have an impact, or whether that is an unnecessary concern, because these things can come up left field and suddenly change the climate of opinion and support in relation to particular areas of investment, and that can come up left field. I don't know whether that's an area of legitimate concern, or whether it's something we don't need to worry ourselves about at this stage. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor William. I suppose from our perspective, obviously we're looking at the historic data, as it were. So from, as I said before, really in relation to Councillor Pete's question about management override, we're very much concerned with what is in the financial statements. So although those elements could come up in the future, from our perspective at the moment, we're very much backwards looking. So we will, so we'll just be relying on our auditor expert just to ensure that those figures that you've got in your Powys Council accounts are as accurate as they can be within that materiality threshold.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor William. I've got Councillor Graham's hand up, and I'm hoping that Councillor Graham will be the last word on these items.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be really brief. It's just on the one valuation of land and buildings, which is also page 11. I'm just a little concerned there to know how deep you'll be going there. You'll be aware, I'm sure, that there was a lot of discussion and indeed some serious questions asked about the valuation of county farms during the last 12 months, and the fact that the valuation was done by an outside company and only one company. So how deep would you intend to go in that area? Are you happy, in fact, that only one company carries out such a valuation, or should we be criticised as an authority for that?
Again, in terms of that, we haven't got the expertise internally. So what we tend to do is we, again, rely on an auditor's expert, and they have a look at the various assumptions and valuations that are made. And then we just check to ensure that that's within the materiality threshold. And I think actually this year farms have been, revalued. So obviously there'll be a bit more information contained in terms of the county farms than potentially there would be, because if it's not a valuation year, there tends to be an indexation, which is a little less in depth than what would have been done this year.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Are there any comments or questions for Emma and Tom on the work programme and timetable going forward, which is item 7?
Yes, Chair, if I may. It's more of observation. On page 57, it's got timetable, audit opinion by the 1st of December, 20234. I think that's an error. I think it should be 2024, not
Sorry, just scrolling down to page 57.
Yeah, 57.
Yeah, I can see there's an error there. It's just a typo, I think.
It's a typo. Yeah.
Yeah. It's
just to flag it.
Yeah, it's referring to the year 20,234. So clearly there's an extra digit tucked in there.
That's a long time to wait for.
Thanks, Chris, for pointing that out.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gareth.
Hello. Can you hear me? I'm having a bit of a
Yes.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, I've been hearing issues here. Yeah, just around the work and the work plan and table plan, is officers able just to comment on capacity? Because obviously there's lots of work that goes into putting all these plans together, especially around Audit Wales, and it can take a lot of time and a lot of effort. And obviously there is the day job as well. I know this is part of the day job, but obviously, and this is an important part of the day job, but obviously there's lots of other stuff that needs to be doing. And obviously over auditing can also have a negative effect, and it's about getting that balance right.
Thank you very much, Councillor Graham. I think I'll pass that one to Jane, whose hand is already up rather than for Audit Wales colleagues. Jane.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, I mean, audit is an essential and important part of the governance arrangements of the authority, as everybody respects. So it's important that we do participate. We do have regular meetings with our colleagues in Audit Wales to look at the plans, look at the impact, particularly if it's impacting on one particular team. Then we do try to space out any audit work because of that impact and because of that general resource requirement. So it's something we're very careful and monitor, but obviously accepting that it's a very important a very important part of the role. Sorry, I couldn't get my words out then. So, but I have the assurance needed that we can accommodate the audits that are forthcoming.
Thanks. Emma, is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I guess just reiterate what Jane said, really. We are in regular dialogue, and I think probably the financial audit side is a little bit different because obviously we've got the statutory deadlines that we have to meet. But I think from a performance side, and Tom can come in if I'm incorrect here, but I think, you know, sometimes we are accommodating if things need to be changed because it just doesn't work with the council, then we are able to do that because we've got that bit more flexibility.
Thank you, Emma. Tom, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, just to second that, really, absolutely. You know, our focus is on, we're acutely aware of the demands that audit places on our audited body. So, you know, wherever possible, we will accommodate those concerns. Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that assurance. Chris, does that, Councillor Chris, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, sorry, it was Councillor Gareth.
Yes, no, that's fine. Yeah, no, thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's no problem. Yeah, no, yeah, it's just one of those. I always ask that question because it's just good to know, obviously, and officers, because obviously what we don't want to do is get later on the line and there's other audits coming from other sections that's put pressure on there and a cumulative effect. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for that. I think we can move on to our internal audit items, and I'll bring in Ian from SWAP for this item. We've got 3 items from Ian, which we'll take in turn as per the agenda. Item 8, which is the annual opinion, the annual internal audit opinion for 23-24. Item 9, which is the regular internal audit progress report, and Kevin Price will lead on that item from SWAP. And then the final item from SWAP is item 10, which is a procurement card internal audit report, and that work was commissioned directly by this committee. So Ian, if we could concentrate first of all on item 8, please.
Thank you, Chair. As your head of internal audit for Powys County Council, it's my duty to report annually in a written format to those charged with governance, which is yourselves, a report giving an annual opinion. So the report is on page 73 of the agenda pack, and I'll just briefly run through the headlines for you. During the year, we undertook 43 assignments, and they were a combination of assurance, special investigation, advisory, grant certifications, and follow-ups. And these assignments are listed in Appendix A on page 85, if you want to look at those, and each one has an opinion. When I look at coverage, there's a coverage map in the report, and it shows that coverage across the council, all across the strategic risks, show that there is either some to good coverage across all strategic risks. So we've done some work across every single aspect of strategic risk. In terms of the outputs, 85% of our outputs from those pieces of work show that we either have a reasonable or substantial audit opinion, so they're positive, which generally means that the council has sound systems of internal control in place. In terms of high corporate risks, I need to bring to your attention, there are no high corporate risks I brought throughout the year, but there were a number of areas or themes of significant concern that I had to bring to your attention. And those were firstly around the school finance and school budgets. We had a couple of high school reports in, and also we looked at the bigger picture through some theme work, and it found that there was some problems around operating with deficit budgets or unlicensed budgets. There was a failure to submit credible recovery plans in some cases, and that the overall governance showed that there was a limited financial oversight and challenge to those budget setting proposals in some schools. The second area I want to bring to your attention is around contract management, and this comes from the Red Dragon work that we did. And the Red Dragon piece of work was a very specific piece of work, but we felt that the wider issues that could be identified and lessons learned from that piece of work. And for example, that would be around contract setting, around the guidance, skills and training that officers that monitored that work were receiving. It was responding to the financial risks and also looking at the risk mitigation. But I think more importantly, on top of that, there was a general cultural behavioural theme that came out of that work, and that was around the silo approach by each service. Services looked at things in their own silo. And I think leading on from that, there was some communication gaps and there need to be better relationships built within the organisation. And in particular around determining ownership and understanding of that ownership. And finally, there was some limited oversight and challenge to those processes, so governance around those areas. But in both those cases, management submitted action plans, and those action plans will be followed up as part of the 23-24 plan. In terms of other areas that would impact on this work, there's fraud. The council have their own counter fraud team, and all I can say is that during our work, we came across no material fraud issues. In terms of risk management, which is another area we'd look at, the council have implemented a new system. They've implemented new policies, and they've introduced risk appetite. And also the audit committee have in fact helped this process considerably by having their deep dives. So I think risk management is in a reasonable place at the moment. So overall, concluding, the overall bigger picture is that on the balance of all of the work that we've done, I can offer a reasonable annual opinion for 23-24. Generally sound systems of governance, risk management and control are in place. So therefore, I ask that members accept the report, and I'll happily answer any questions that they wish to ask.
Thank you very much, Ian. I'll open the floor to members to ask any questions and seek any further assurances that they require. Councillor Peake.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, and thanks, Ian. I wasn't sure if I was going to say this or not, because I don't want to risk sounding like I keep banging the same drum. I just get the bit underpinning this, and it's a bit of a conundrum for me, is the issue around, say, whistleblowing cases. So I fully understand the need to encourage and protect whistleblowers, but what I don't know is if through that duty of confidentiality, if Ian, you as an internal auditor are getting enough information that you're able to make a decision on whether or not the outcome of that case does have an impact on your opinion.
Clearly, as part of our work, I know there's a review going on whistleblowing at the moment. We've looked at whistleblowing in the past, and there is a due process. As part of our planning process, we look at complaints, and we speak to the fraud team, and we speak to the monitoring officer to have a look at, are there any whistleblowing, or we need to look at what the control risk would have been, and the failure that occurred, that whistleblowing complaint to occur. So we consider it as part of our internal audit planning process. And internal audit is one of the avenues for whistleblowing. So if the authority, if an individual is unhappy with the authority, then internal audit and external audit are both avenues that an unhappy person can come to. So we should find out in that way as well.
Thank you, Ian. I can see Jane wants to come in on this point as well. Jane.
Just to pick up, I mean, in terms of internal audit's role, their role is not to have an opinion on whether the outcome of a specific case was appropriate. There are mechanisms to do that. Obviously, you have the appeals process, and then if people are still not comfortable or accepting of the results, then there are those other avenues to explore through the regulators, the ombudsman, and so on. And I know, of course, very often Audit Wales get involved in some of those instances where individuals will go directly to them. And of course, then those discussions are had with the authority as well. So you are not in every case, the person involved is not necessarily going to be happy in every individual case, but there are those mechanisms for the effectiveness of the decision, if you like, to be reviewed by somebody other than just the council. So all of those mechanisms are there and available to people.
Thanks, Jane. Thank you. Any further points on the annual audit opinion, colleagues? The one from me, which is probably for Jane rather than Ian, it's really the learning point and things to look out for. Was the silo issue, which emerged in the Red Dragon audit, and could, like the contract management, could potentially be applied more broadly to the work of the authority. And I think what I would be seeking assurance on is that the leadership team, the senior officers, will be mindful of that risk, especially going into the sustainable power space and the transformation space, because we really need that. We need to address any risk of silo working to give ourselves the confidence that we can maximise the impact of the plans going forward. It was really for Jane rather than Ian.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll come in and I will just pick up, Ian mentioned contract management, and I was just going to remind committee that we did have a report from our head of procurement back in April through the committee that really set out some of the things that we've put in place to improve that. So I'm not going to go back over that in any detail, but just to remind committee if you want to refresh yourselves from that. I think in terms of the silo working and all of the learning that comes from any audit report, that oversight is clearly there at a senior leadership team. We collectively meet as heads of service and directors across the organisation routinely. And where there are any instances, such as the Red Dragon was something that we've reviewed there, but other things that we review collectively as well, to really make sure the organisation is working together more effectively. So I think those frameworks are already impacting and having a good impact on the organisation. An example for myself, being the director across corporate services, I have that overview and again can make sure that all of those cogs in the wheel, if you like, are working collectively to achieve the same outcome. So I feel that the council is in a far better place to break down those silos now, and hopefully you'll be seeing that come into fruition as you see the Sustainable Powers programme develop and the output from that.
Thanks very much, Jane. Thank you. Thanks. So on this item, our role, as Ian reminded us, is to seek assurance that the council's internal control mechanisms are in place and operating effectively. And in that regard, Ian is advising us of his annual opinion that the council has is in the reasonable category. So are we content to note that and move forward?
Propose.
Yeah, yeah. John and Councillor William. Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you. We'll move on to agenda item 9, which is the internal audit progress report. And Kevin Price from SWAP is going to lead on this. Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, all. I've given you a brief overview of the report that can be found on page 91 of the pack. The report covers a period from the 1st of April to the 18th of July 24 and aims to provide an overview of our audit activities, findings and progress made in strengthening our internal controls and risk management processes. Within the period, the internal audit team have completed 13 reviews across various departments and functions. Of those 13, 8 have been classed as support or advisory audits, such as grant certifications or follow-ups, etc. And the remaining 5 are assurance-rated reports. We've identified key areas of strength as well as opportunities for improvement, and we've worked closely with managers to develop agreed actions to remediate any issues identified. In the report, you will see a summary of the completed audits, the number of findings within these, and also the status of the 12 pieces of work that we currently have in progress. Also included in the report is a section that maps out our level of coverage against internal and external measures, analysing the root cause of issues and various areas of risk identified. We then use this data to influence the selection of the next job from the rolling audit plan. As an authority, the current overall rating is low reasonable, which is due to 2 of the 5 assurance audits receiving a limited rating. But we do envisage that the rating will improve as the year goes on and more assurance work is undertaken. The 2 jobs that have been rated as limited are levelling up Montgomery Canal and direct payments, both of which will be presented to committee in the next meeting in September. I'd just like to take this opportunity to remind members that all the data contained in the report and more data is available in real time via the Audit Board dashboards that you all have access to. And on a final note today, internal audit are on track to deliver the annual audit opinion at the end of the year. And I welcome any questions or comments.
Thanks very much, Kevin. Questions or comments on the progress report? Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Kevin, for your contribution to the meeting and the work that goes on within SWAP to support the authority. Moving on to agenda item 10, which is the procurement card internal audit report. Ian, could you introduce this? And then I'll ask Jane perhaps to say some remarks in response, and then I'll open the floor to colleagues to ask questions and seek assurances as they wish. Ian, please.
Thank you, Chair. Following concerns raised by the Governance Audit Committee, SWAP were commissioned to undertake a review of procurement cards, purchase cards, and we looked at the fraud risk elements of that. The report is on 107 of the agenda pack, the detailed report. It is quite a detailed report. There's a summary at the start, and then there's more detailed analytics and data that falls at the second half of that report. I want to make it clear at this stage that this audit is about the processes. This report is not looking at every single payment that we made and whether that was legitimate or not legitimate. We were looking at the controls, and we did that by the controls we'd expect to see in place, like approval or separation of duty. And we did that by looking at data and by sending out questionnaires to purchase card users. So as a little bit of background, procurement cards are just like normal credit cards. They're issued to people with a financial limit, and then the people go and buy goods and services. And then the purchaser is required to update, is to put supported documentation like invoices onto the system, and then that's approved by an independent third party. The exception to this is where we have something called a lodged card. A lodged card is in a single person's name, but it can be used by multiple people. So as I've mentioned, in terms of context, we sent out a questionnaire. We had 223 responses, and I must congratulate the authority because that's a 50% hit rate. It's really, really positive, and the responses are very candid and open. We looked at 12 months worth of data, and that was 62,000 transactions, looking at 12 million pounds worth of expenditure. So turning to the outcomes, if you look at page 109 of the report, on our page, big page 109, there's something that's called a sunburst chart there. And that chart shows the outcomes from the questionnaire, and which is in the second circle from the outside, and the results from the data, which are on the outside circle. And it gives that a RAG rating there to show the areas of high risk. So obviously the amber and red areas are high risk. The overall opinion based on the controls that we looked at were reasonable from the chart, but I'll run through briefly through the key findings. And those key findings are in the next couple of pages of the report. In terms of fraud and awareness, council staff were reasonably aware about fraud with purchase cards, but we felt that the authority could provide a mechanism that wasn't as formal as the whistleblowing policy, but a mechanism that provided support and the ability to question in a less formal environment. So a support mechanism for that questioning and challenging. We looked at guidance and training. There was general fraud training was delivered widely across all users of the council, which is really positive again. But there was an opportunity to undertake more at induction stage with new users, and that some of the guidance needed change, reflecting to reflect new practices. In terms of security, most people had good security practices, but there were isolated incidences of security breaches. In terms of purchasing, the agreements for the cards, in terms of lodged cards where there were multiple users, there appeared to be a contradiction between the terms of the contract and the way they were being used. So that needs to be looked at. And of course, a number of users then means there's less accountability and less transparency over some of those, or there could be. In terms of the things that were purchased, there was definitely an inconsistency between different parts of the council about what they determined were either a personal expense or an allowable expense. So things like gift cards, coffee, in some parts of the organisation that was allowable, in others it possibly isn't. But there's definitely a lack of consistency. It's something that needs to be controlled and viewed. And I think we felt that maybe some kind of guidance, if possible, could help that area. The back office worked very well, but again, they could, I think, be encouraged or receive some training in terms of specific fraud signs that they could identify as part of that workflow process. And then finally, second from final actually, is the approval process. I think this was our biggest area of risk. You know, a successful approval requires someone to have background knowledge, detailed scrutiny then of those transactions, and that should be close to the point of purchase in terms of time. And if you do those things, I think therefore you will make sure that transactions are legitimate and that the risk of fraud is low. The audit found that there were certain approvers that had a high volume of approvals. So, you know, so we would question whether their ability to scrutinise in detail was affected in terms of that. And also the time that it would take, it varied greatly throughout the council, but the average time was 28 days. So from purchasing something, on average, it took 28 days to approve, which again, probably is not the most robust process, and that clearly needs to be more agile. Also, in terms of the approvals, where something isn't approved, it sits in a holding area, and we found that there were a large volumes of transactions that remained unapproved throughout the year, but in particular at year end, I think we identified £440,000. And again, it's really £440,000. It's really important that we scrutinise and sign those and approve those off in a timely manner, because again, the longer they're on there, some are older than 3 months, the longer that they're on there, the greater the chance of risk or error, or so that that's certainly an issue with us. And then finally, around general compliance, I think, as I've mentioned, the controls in the system were good, but I think there could be some work done around the spending patterns to make sure that we spend effectively. Obviously, we've got 450 users, they're all spending individually. If someone could have oversight over that, there might be some efficiencies that could be found in terms of that. Things around the maintenance and admin of the purchase cards, like making sure that leavers and people on sick leave and maternity, that we take those off quickly, and that we look at new people that can authorize and do the work instead, and maybe looking at dormant cards. One area that is also important is around the narrative and description that's placed against some of the transactions. They could certainly be improved, and again, the better the narrative, the greater the information provided to the approver, which means there's more robustness in the approval process. And then finally, around VAT errors, there are VAT improvements in VAT errors, but there still needs to be further improvement to continue that journey. So there's 15 recommendations. The council have developed an action plan, which is attached. And I think I'll just conclude by saying, as I mentioned, that the system itself is robust. I think the main challenge with this audit doesn't lie with the system so much, it lies with the behaviour. It's the behaviour of the card users and approvers. And so I think what we've set and what the action set are a clear framework and guidance for compliance, but sometimes behaviour can only be corrected by support in terms of awareness and training and corporate oversight and escalation. So I'll conclude with that. In terms of where we go from here, in some of the areas, in particular lodge cards where there's multiple users, we are going to do deep dives. In fact, we're starting one next week, deep dives in certain areas of the council. So we'll report back on those deep dives. If members have any questions, happy to answer.
Thanks very much, Ian. I'll give Jane the opportunity to come in just before I open the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I think just to cover off a couple of points, I think raised by Ian. First off, in terms of purchase cards, they're a really effective way of making payments for the council. They're quick. They cost a lot less than the sort of the more general invoice processing and so on. But that being said, they are only effective as long as the controls are in place to manage the system, as with any system. So I think the report, as Ian has highlighted, says that the process is effective. It is not the controls that are in place that are of any issue. Any issues that are being picked up are around accountability, behaviours and the responsibilities of officers. And I think you have to make that distinction between the two to some degree. That being said, I think as an authority, we've done a lot of work over the last few months where as an output from a previous audit report that recognised a weakness in terms of purchase card use. The Chief Executive immediately asked every head of service for their assurance about the purchase cards being used in their particular service area. And she had a response from each and every head of service after they had reviewed the transactions across their service for that level of assurance which she was given. I think it's important to note that in terms of the items purchased on purchase cards, we are a very diverse organisation. Some services expenditure will be appropriate, in others it won't. So I think in terms of trying to put a list together, that would be a really hard ask and a very detailed report to do. However, that being said, this is very much down to responsibility of officers and accountability for their actions and the management of staff and the reporting processes through the organisation. So that's what we've probably reflected on more so in terms of tightening up the whole process. Fraud training is mandatory. Our compliance rates across all of our mandatory training are now up in the 90% across the organisation. So, you know, we've made significant improvements across that. And the reporting that we've reviewed and amended to give managers better oversight of transactions should really help with that effectiveness and scrutiny at a service level. So there's lots of things being put in place to actually improve on that. I think in terms of lodge cards and more than one approver, personally, I don't see that as an issue, or we wouldn't allow it. But responsibility clearly sits with the approver to make sure that the use of that card is appropriate and to tackle anything that isn't. You know, I know from my own perspective, we have a card that is used by several people, but I authorize every payment against that. I see every invoice against those transactions. So fulfilling my job in terms of that role, I am assured that that expenditure is reflective of and appropriate for the organisation. So I just wanted to pick up on many of those things. Have I missed anything? I think in terms of the housekeeping and the approval process and the speed of that, yes, improvements can clearly be made there. That housekeeping is absolutely critical to make sure that our financial statements are as up to date as possible so that we can monitor our budgets effectively. So again, that's something we've been looking at. Dormant and cards that are not used appropriately will and have been withdrawn and stopped. And clearly we have that mechanism in place where we need to implement it. So I hope that gives you a bit of a flavour of my perspective, but I think very much it is around that accountability and responsibility of officers that is where the focus needs to be to make sure it's appropriate.
Okay, thank you very much, Ian, and your team for conducting the audit, and thanks very much to Ian and Jane for speaking to the report. I've got Councillor Pete, Councillor Gareth and Councillor Chris already, so I'll take you in that order and anyone else who wishes to speak.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, and thanks, Ian and Jane, for running through that and the extra detail is there as well. That's much appreciated. I had a couple of points, if I may, Chair. I'll just run through. I think, Ian, you started at the beginning by saying 50% was a good response rate. It does just make me wonder why the other 50%, which is quite a large chunk, didn't reply. And I wonder why they didn't reply. So first question is, are you doing any further work on that? Looking into the pack, in my pack, it's on page 108. So apologies if some of the numbers are now out of sequence. And it was around the background where it appears that the audit's done based on these self-assessment questionnaires. So I wanted to ask, have you been made or are you aware of any issues in a particular area? So say as a result of a suspected fraud, and if so, would you include that in, say, like a real life case study in your audit? Because it would, I guess, substantiate what you're being told in the questionnaires. But that may be what's behind your deep dives on the risks. Next point was around, I think it's on page 117, some of the tables, and one of the headings there is schools stroke education, and I just wanted to seek some clarity around whether that included the pupil referral units, which then flips onto page 118, where there is again another table there, and again for that category, schools in education, I think it's showing that over 50% are saying there's a certain stroke probable threat. So again, I wondered if that would be an area that you would be focusing on. And then finally, I guess I was just sort of slightly concerned when I looked at page 120, the final paragraph, and forgive me, I'll just flip back to where it was. It was again around fraud risk, and it said updates should be provided to staff to ensure they're aware of what to do in the event of a fraud and who they could report to. And I just wondered what was being done specifically to address that. and again, whether that ties in with any of the other governance frameworks, such as whistleblowing. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Councillor Pete. Ian,
Yes, Chair, there's a lot of questions in
a
there.
lot of questions.
So I'll do my best to try and answer those. In terms of the response rate, which was 50%, obviously we don't know. There's quite a short window for the survey. And in terms of some of the people surveyed, some of those played a lesser part. So we have a procurer. I'd expect them to reply, and an approver, but some were back office, and so they're just on the periphery of that, so they may not apply. 50%, I think, you know, if I look at the 223 cases, I think it gives us a good grounding to form an opinion, and that's what I need. We've got a good grounding there. In terms of are we going to do anything for the other 50% or do this again? There will be something that will follow up on this, and there may well be another piece of audit work and another questionnaire to show the improvement. But I think we will decide and determine that as we move forward on this. In terms of the self-assessment side of it, there's obviously the questionnaire, very detailed questionnaire, but there's also data. So we also looked at a lot of lines of data. We used analytical data tools to look at that, looking for issues. So it's not all just about what people told us. We've actually gone and confirmed that in a lot of cases. And in some cases, we found a contradiction. I think when we, for an example, we look at the approval time, people have told us that they approve the purchase promptly. When we look at the actual data, that's slightly different. So there is a contradiction. So we do check to make sure that what people are telling us is the correct position. In terms of and in terms of a fraud case, we didn't identify any cases of fraud as part of this work. If we did, obviously we'd have to go through the due process and it would have to go to the counter fraud team. But I would expect that anything that came out of this, or anything else, any other work that other parts of the council would do, would go to a lessons learned process. And so we should learn, and case studies like that could be brought into other pieces of audit work, not necessarily this one because of the time scale, but certainly we would include case studies if they were relevant. In terms of the school and the PRU and the possible threats, the PRU, I think, were included. If you have a purchase card, you would have been included in the survey. So if they have a purchase card, they would, and I believe they do, or they did certainly. In terms of the school's focus and thoughts around threats, I you know, the high value, I can't remember what the value you were quoted in the report, but there was a high value, and that showed that the schools were aware of the risk of fraud. I think it was 80% plus. So that pleases me that the schools are aware of that risk, and therefore, if they're aware of it, they would be looking out for that and be looking to obviously combat that. And then finally, about reporting fraud. The last question on reporting fraud, I think, again, the whistleblowing mechanisms are set in stone and they're sacrosanct. But I guess where there are cases that might fall into the gap of a concern or a query, we would like to see a secondary process that sits there, that somebody can go to somebody in the purchase card team or somebody else just to say, what do you think? Is this right? And then get some guidance. That may well turn into a whistleblowing process, or it might go through the normal course of activities. But certainly the whistleblowing process should be there for the most serious cases raised by individuals. I hope that answers those questions, Chair.
Sorry, guys, I was on mute. I'm going to bring in Councillor Gareth, then Councillor Chris, then John, and then Jane at the end.
Thank you very much. I'm going to be very quick because Chris has actually covered most of my questions. Councillor Pete's covered my questions around the schools. Just a couple of quick things regarding, do you think the purchase card reflects the service areas correctly? Because I know it's quite high in children's services. Obviously then looking at highways and transport and housing, the purchase cards there, do you think that actually truly reflects the across the authority and other authorities that we've got too many purchase cards in certain areas and not enough in others? And also then value for money. Obviously it doesn't take this up as more of a finance question. How do we know that we're actually getting value for money, that instead of someone going along and saying, well, actually I need that, so yes, fair enough, we can authorize that, but actually they're spending far too much money on items where actually there are other systems in place. Because yes, it's it's a purchase, and sometimes if you shop around you can get a cheaper deal, because looking at the overall expenses of the thousands that are there, sorry, I can't remember what it is. I did read it, but the amount of money spent, this is a large amount of money being spent by the authority, and I'm just wondering if that's assessed value for money. And then the last question is, do we look at patterns? Are we purchasing lots of the same items? And actually, are there systems in place that we could bulk buy purchase that in a system to obviously not have as a procurement purchase, but actually look at buying? So I've used books or something for as example, and I'm not saying it is, but if there's there, and if we're purchasing them across the authority multiple times, are we assessing that to say, well, actually, we're procuring when we shouldn't be doing it through the card, we should be looking through a different procurement process?
Thank you.
Thank you,
Councillor Gareth. In terms of the just to remind you, I think it was 12 million pounds go through the purchase card system in a year. Surprisingly, that's only 5% of the actual expenditure of the council, so it's much smaller than you actually think, but those still very important, clearly. In terms of the services, there are differences in the services that have been reflected in this report. I think that different services operate in different ways. A housing team or a highways team need to get a lot of materials. A children's services unit have different priorities, and they work in different ways. So that's why we're going to do some of the deep dive work, I think, just to make sure that we're comfortable with all with those different processes. In terms of value for money, there are clear rules around value for money. The financial regulations tells us about how we should properly procure, and so that's key. And also the approver has a role to play. So every approver, before they and the purchaser, actually, because once it's purchased, it's committed, but they should question themselves, in terms of what they're purchasing, why they're purchasing, can it be purchased in a different way? But your point on patterns is really valid. We're talking about lots of different purchases from lots of different places by lots of different services. There is definitely the potential there for looking at, like items purchased with the same supplier, to do some spend work. What I will say is that in terms of value for money, I think purchase cards, in fact, has aided that, because now we are no longer tied to a certain place. A purchaser has the option to go to many, many different places to buy, and buy those quite easily. So I'd say, if anything, procurement cards have enhanced value for money. Hope that's okay, Councillor Gareth.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. That's good. I'm pleased with that, and also I would like to see that actually it does support local businesses as well within Paris, because obviously they're shopping more locally, and not waiting obviously for an approved from the Welsh government approval list that the local business may not be on there, which we've had previously. So I'd just like to highlight that actually purchase cards, in my view, do actually assist the Paris economy as well.
Thanks, Councillor Gareth, and thanks, Ian. Councillor Chris, and then John. Councillor Chris?
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now, yeah.
Sorry. Thank you for the report, Ian. It's really interesting stuff on the diagram on page 109 highlights 2 areas in red, which are significant risks. In relation to the scoring of those different colour codes, does it have to be across the board, or are you just looking for one area to be in like a negative position that you'll then report it as a significant risk? So that clarification would be helpful. Or are you seeing that that risk was across the board? Because that's then a different, that's part of culture then, which we just need to unpack a little bit more. And within your then deep dives, are you looking to focus in on those 2 areas of reds? Or are you going to focus on a different area? And if you are, the rationale around that going forward. Just some commentary in relation to the 50% on there. It was something that I noticed as well. But generally, I think that's a good response rate. Anything over 16.8% to any questionnaires or survey is positive. So I think that's a credit to you there. A consideration is to ask the questions regarding accountability when people are doing the PDRs of why didn't they participate in that if it's something that the organisation sees value within. And again, that's linking into our culture. But a positive that Jane mentioned was that our fraud training position is improving through mandatory training. So that's an encouragement that we are on the right direction moving forward. But I think this is really helpful because this is starting to tease out practices and culture, and that can only make improvements going forward. So thank you.
Chair, can I respond to that quickly?
You're on mute.
Yes, Ian. Sorry, I'm on mute again. Sorry. Yes,
Sorry.
go ahead, Ian.
Quickly, in terms of the response rate, quickly, I agree. I think it's a really great response rate. What I will say is I think it's a reflection of how the organisation are starting to value and respect the work of internal audit now. So I think that's a really valid point. In terms of the red areas, it is around audit judgment. So it's mine and my team's judgment about what we make as a red area. Sometimes there will be one specific thing in that area that we feel is so important, it will colour all the other areas, even though the other areas may be okay, or it could be a more general failing in that area. The 2 red areas around average days and unapproved, we will follow those up in our deep dives, and we will look at, we'll be able to have a look at a little bit more depth, looking at, again, diving into certain parts of that directorate. So I think we will be looking a bit more at the culture. We've got indications that there are some cultural problems somewhere, but I think the deep dive will really allow us to identify in what part and what particular issue. So I'm looking forward to those. And we'll also do a little bit more work around the procurement and legitimacy of those pieces of expenditure as well. So we'll feed back to you on that. But I hope that answers your question, Councillor Chris.
Yeah. Thank you.
Done it again. I was on mute again, sorry. I'll bring in John and then I'll give Jane the final response on this.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, Ian, thank you very much. This is a very thorough piece of work and it's very much appreciated. As you know, I've been rather anxious about the purchase cards, and certainly some of the statistics that we see fairly regularly through the Treasury Management Report have given us cause for concern over the years. And I must say there has been an improvement in those. They were running at one stage at 25% odd. It dropped to, I believe, about 5% at the end of the last year, for the whole of the last year. But I'm afraid in the last quarter they've gone up again. So we've got to keep our eye on that particular issue. My concern here, I've got two concerns really. The first one is if we take a look at page 109, we see red, yellow, and blue. But the criteria here have been looked at through the prism of fraud, and I just wonder what those colours would be if we'd looked at those through the prism of control frameworks. Would we be seeing more yellows and indeed more reds? I've quoted there the VAT thing because I think that is really quite appropriate. My other disappointment, I have to say, is that when we come to the action plan, the main report that says the action plan will be published shortly, appeared. The actual action plan is in a supplementary paper, which I haven't had a chance to even read. What I would like to do, and in confirmation of the minute that was in the April meeting, was that perhaps we could get the internal working group set up so that we can look at some of these things in rather more detail and really follow up on this useful work you've done here, Ian. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Chair, do you want me to quickly respond?
Very quickly.
It's in terms of, you know, the action plan is the action plan, and Jane can probably answer that. In terms of the fraud protection element of it, behind the protection of fraud is the internal control environment. So would it be any different? I'm not sure it would. I think in terms of this, although we badge it as fraud, it's still the controls, because the controls protect against the fraud. So I don't think it would be much different if we looked at it with a slightly different aspect. John.
Well, I have to come back there, Ian. There are some metrics in this report which are extremely disappointing. I mean, the delay in approval, I mean, there's £200,000 worth is there more than 6 months. We reported 700 odd thousand there outstanding at year end. If we go back again to the VAT thing, I mean, we're now talking about 12.5% of invoices coming through incorrectly coded. That is not acceptable. It's not acceptable at the first level, but secondly, it's costing us, I imagine, a considerable sum of money checking all these. And you know, Jane's staff could well be doing other things. I think these things need to be followed up.
I totally agree, John, and it's noted, very much noted. And obviously, we never want you to be disappointed. We'd rather you weren't. So we shall make sure that we work closely, and perhaps we'll pull you in for any future work and get your comment as part of that.
Yeah, the working group will be fine. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, John. Jane, final word on this, please.
Yeah, just a couple of things to cover off. In terms of Councillor Pete asked about reporting on fraud. There are a number of mechanisms in which people can report fraud, not just through the whistleblowing policy, which will probably be the last resort as I see it. You know, normally you would report it through your normal management report in the first instance, accepting that sometimes that may not be acceptable. Then obviously you can go to another manager or your head of service and report as appropriate. We do have a report fraud button on our intranet. So any member of staff can report something there, again, without going down the formal route, but that would then go straight through to Yvette's team and she would pick that up immediately. We do have a zero tolerance approach to fraud across the organisation, and that's very much reinforced by CLT. And I think, as Councillor Chris picked up on, it's about the culture of the organisation, that honesty, that openness, and you know, the ability to be able to report fraud if you see it. So that's very much part of the focus. I think it's just worth pointing out, though, that purchase cards are the means in which we make payment. They do not stipulate who and where we buy from. that is very much controlled, as Ian pointed out, by our procurement rules and by the contracts and contractual arrangements that we have in place. So it's important to make that distinction, I think, between the two. Value for money absolutely is a focus, as always, in any spend that we make. And as I've already sort of hinted, using the cards is the most cost-effective way of making payments. It's very much lower cost, but of course, in terms of the goods that we buy, it's making sure we're buying them at the optimum price versus the quality of what we're getting as well, and that's clearly a focus. So I'm not going to cover off any more. I think Ian's covered most of it, but just wanted to add those points.
Thank you. From me, I would just like to reiterate my thanks to Ian and his team for the thoroughness of this report, and to thank John for his particular interest, and other committee members for their thorough scrutiny of this work. I think the deep dives in the action plan are very welcome, and I'd like the working group on our behalf, under John's chairmanship, to focus on the ongoing work in this space on the committee's behalf, and to report back accordingly on a regular basis, if that's okay with John and Jane and Ian and committee members.
Absolutely, it is.
Right, thank you very much, everyone. We dwelt quite heavily and for quite a long time on that report, but I think it merited it because we as a committee had initiated this work, and it is really, really important, as the depth of the discussion has demonstrated. So thank you for your forbearance, everyone, on that one. I'm going to move us on to corporate items, and I'm going to ask if we move to agenda item 11, which is the Q1 fraud and error report, and Craig and Yvette are going to lead us on this one. So if I could ask them to, in the remarks, to focus in on the pertinent issues, and allow time for committee members to quiz them if they wish to. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just referring back to your opening remarks, I'm not going to take the committee through the detail of the report, but it is an opportunity for the committee to feed into the future work plans of the team as we go forward. Just referring to section 2 with regards to the policies, all 3 of those policies have been reviewed recently, and you note from the April minutes that the last 2 policies were noted, and they have been updated effective from the beginning of August. Table 3 provides some summary on the investigations that are ongoing, with 60 new investigations that have commenced in 24-25, and we can see from the outcomes there on the far right around overpayment, rebill and gains, which was a request of previous committee. Moving on quickly then to number 4 before I stop, with regards to the gains and outcomes achieved. And if there are any questions, Yvette is with us today, as you say, who leads up the counter fraud team, will be able to respond to any specific queries from committee members. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Craig, and you're very welcome, Yvette. Any questions from committee members, please? Councillor Pete.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, and thanks, Craig and Yvette, for not only the report, but all the work that you and the team actually do in this respect. It's really valuable. Again, as per usual, Chair, I've just had a couple of questions. Under 2.1 of I think Anne's report is the author there, and Craig touched on it. It lists all the sort of policies within the governance framework. I just wondered whether that should also include my favourite topic of the whistleblowing policy and whistleblowing code. And then my other point was, I think it's section 3.3, where we get the breakdown of the figures. There's a category there regarding insufficient or no evidence cases, and I think we've got 3. And I just wonder what is the work we do to actually find the evidence, and what happens if we don't find any more evidence. And then I guess my final point is, when I look at all the categories, I guess in a way the team should be trying to do themselves out of a job by working through and addressing all these issues. So what is actually in place to, if you like, stop the frauds happening again, and in a way there's no need to recover any money, and the report becomes more one around attempted frauds, or is that just a utopia that we can never get to? Thank you, Chair.
It's a good aspiration to have, Councillor Pete. Craig, Yvette.
Well, if I speak to the second parts of the questions there, if I may, around the policies and the inclusion of the whistleblowing, perhaps Craig can add to that. But certainly the insufficient or no evidence cases, as you'll appreciate, we get referrals from all different places, and sometimes we get them through the hotline where somebody will say, I've just seen somebody using a blue badge in Tesco's car park and they shouldn't be using it. So I'm reporting it to you, and what are you going to do about it? And we say, well, can you give us any more detail? No, they've driven off now. Do you know what car it was? No, sorry. So insufficient evidence, you know, sort of, we do get extreme situations like that, where we just can't identify whose badge it might be. For example, in this case, the blue badge, who's been using it, that kind of thing. But just to talk to a positive front, where we do get some identifying information, so it could be like there's a lady who lives on Smith Street down the bottom who has a man living with her, and he's got a black car that can be seen parked round the back behind there hidden. It could be then that we take a drive down there, or we have a look to see if we can identify any further information to pull that thread. If we absolutely can't find anything, with each and every case that is referred to us, whichever way it is referred to us, whether it's through the hotline, whether it's through the intranet, whether it's through the internet, or even an internal member of staff who wants to flag something, we record those cases on our fraud case management system. And if we are unable to progress them at the time, we close that case. However, should more information come in, not only the system will automatically pick up on a person, an address, or something that is similar to, and say this, you know, will alert the officer who is setting up the new case on the system that there's already been a referral there. So then sometimes that does happen, that we're able to develop that case. It may not be immediately, but it may be on the slow build, or it may be that somebody else comes in with further information about that. So hopefully that gives you some assurance that we don't just think, oh, we can't do anything with that now, so we're never going to be able to do anything. We always like to say, maybe we can't at the moment, but maybe it will come to something, and we're always looking at that. And that also is helped by the proactive review work that we do as an ongoing basis, not just within the council, but with other organisations, with the police, for example, with the Department of Work and Pensions, and also through the use of the National Fraud Initiative data matching, because sometimes it can be something that comes through that will assist in developing a case. So they're never wasted, and we never turn cases away, and we never say no thank you. We always say yes please. Even though there aren't many of us, we're always pleased to hear when people are reporting. So I hope that answers that one. And as far as doing ourselves out of a job, from that point of view, I don't think that's ever going to happen. We do always look, as part of the work that we do when we're investigating cases where we see there has been a process failure, or there isn't a policy that particularly covers something that's fallen down, or there is a new opportunity, then we raise that. And it may well be that we ask Ian's team to get involved as well, but we certainly raise that as part of our recommendations throughout the cases that we look at. Even if it doesn't meet the fraud threshold, if it's met the threshold or it reveals that there is a risk, then certainly we will raise that as part of the fraud risk work that we do. I mean, in the world of fraud, every opportunity is a chance. Therefore, the opportunity to steal from the public purse is infinite. Fraudsters like those odds, and fraudsters turn every chance into an opportunity. So as the police will never be out of a job, we'll never be out of a job either, I don't think, but I stand to be corrected. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvette. Thank you, Yvette, for your ongoing work. Craig, could you just deal with the policy point, and then I'm going to go to John Brottingham and then Councillor William.
Certainly, Jade. This report focuses on those policies that are relevant to the anti-fraud team. Whistleblowing isn't part of the direct responsibility of this team. But it's key to note that within the whistleblowing policy, there is a section in how to raise concerns internally around fraud, but I just need to emphasize that it isn't part of the remit of this team, and that's why it's not included in this specific report.
Thank you, Craig. John, and then Councillor William.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief. The committee knows how keen I am on Invest to Save. And in relation to that, I'm very impressed with the table on page 139 and 140, which is showing the yields from potential financial yields from the work of this section. This is a very serious question. If you had additional resource, would you be able to improve on those, even those creditable figures?
The honest answer, as I would always provide, is yes, we would be able to improve on those figures, because we would be able to cover more areas of work, I think, and be able to reach out further into other service areas to see what we can do there as well. And I do believe that we would be able to, yes.
Thank you. I hope Jane is listening. She is. Thank you.
Thanks both. Thank you very much. Councillor William, last question on this item.
Thank you, Chair. And just a brief one to thank Craig and Yvette very much for their contributions to this important item. In terms of putting a little bit of resource in terms of awareness raising, I wanted to ask both officers whether there are any plans internally or in association with our partners, such as perhaps the police, to mark International Fraud Awareness Week late in November. I think the note of it, the 17th to the 23rd of November. It seems to me that this is something that we need to come back to on a fairly regular basis, and particularly in the wider context of cost of living crisis and some of the other potential drivers for people to perhaps to do the wrong thing, and also whether it would be possible for us to liaise with our member colleagues, those of us who are members of council, to see whether we can include this or ratchet it up the agenda of member and officer training. We've previously had good events, and I think this is something that might be timely and helpful as we go into the autumn.
Thank you very much.
Is that okay for me to answer?
Yeah,
Sorry.
I mean, I think, and this also bears out the cultural point that the cultural theme that we've come across in several items, doesn't it? Yvette, for the detail.
Thank you. I was just going to say that the International Fraud Awareness Week is something that we've always jumped on, certainly for as long as I can remember, and we seek to do send-outs every year. But I don't see that as just a 1 week when we should be flying the flag. I think the opportunity for us, and more since the fraud awareness training has become mandatory, we are being contacted by a lot more staff now, to talk about fraud, to sort of talk more in their particular areas, to share that advice, and to look at developing fraud champions in areas of the service, which is fantastic. So for us, and me in particular, even after 25 years, I can still talk the hind legs off a donkey with the fraud, because it just keeps growing.
Yeah.
So it's really, really exciting that we're doing that. We also share out on a regular basis outside organisation fraud risks and things that are happening. So we do those across Teams channels. I email them out. We're also we run the Wales Fraud Officer Group, which also incorporates the fraud team from the Welsh Government. And we invite other professionals as well to those meetings to share knowledge and skills, and to sort of make sure that everybody is pushing that fraud message out. So I hope that gives you some assurance, Councillor William.
Thank you very much for that. That is helpful, and I think it's something that we need to keep on our wider agenda, cross-cutting as well, as you suggest. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Craig. Thanks, Yvette. Thanks, everyone, for your questions, and especially thanks to Yvette for her professionalism and her commitment to this, because it's really, really clear from the conversations that we regularly have in this committee that Yvette and our team are a significant asset to the authority. So thank you very much for your attendance and for all of your work. I'm going to move us on to item 12, which is the Q4 and Q1 Treasury Management Report. And James is with us to briefly introduce the report and take any questions. James.
Good morning, members. You obviously have plenty of chance to read the reports. The Q4 one is also covers a bit of a review of the whole year. The most notable thing in that, we were in a position to reduce our overall debt by around 20 million between the start and the end of the year. And the Q1 report just provides an update for that quarter. Nothing further to add, I think.
Thank you, James. Any questions for James, please? Councillor Pete.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Sorry, I was just going back to the report. Thanks, James. I think I was looking at the Q1 report and just had two questions, if I may. The first one's on page 165 in my pack, and it's paragraph 3.3. And I sort of understand the maths and the risk appetite behind using cash reserves as opposed to borrowing with the level of interest rates. But I guess my question is, if we go that route, can we always guarantee that we could borrow if we needed to do so? So in a way, is a higher interest rate at the moment sort of like worth paying because we can't guarantee future borrowings? The other question, James, was I was looking at paragraph 311 of that Q1 report, which seems to be implying that the cost of living crisis is over, because it talks about prior to the cost of living, whereas then paragraph 3.50 says the cost of living is ongoing. So I guess as we're trying to consider this report in the whole, I was just slightly confused as to whether it's ongoing or whether it's over. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks.
I'll come back in. I'll pick up the cost of living one first. The paragraph 3.11 was purely stating that prices have increased since the cost of living crisis began. It doesn't state that it's over in that case. So perhaps it's just people have got different takes on how you read that paragraph. We're not stating that it's over by no means, but we're still feeling the effects of it, as is everyone else. On the availability of borrowing, we have the we are able to borrow from various sources, other local councils, and from the Public Works Loan Board. We continue to make sure that those are available to us, and there's no reason why us not borrowing from any of them at this point in time would hinder us borrowing in future. In fact, because we have audited accounts from previous years, which some councils don't, that's making it slightly more tricky for them to borrow from other local authorities than it is for us. So, and of course, we've got a draft set of accounts recently, which is even better because they've got the most up-to-date information when we go to borrow from other authorities.
Thank you, James. Councillor Chris, and then I'll give Councillor Pete the last question on this. Councillor Chris.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the report. On the again, just picking back up in relation to the inflation, are we from the money market starting to see any of those interest rates potentially coming down going forward, which would then help us if we did need to go to any further borrowing? And then the other thing I've raised before is about if we've got a cost of living crisis still going on, the amount of council tax take, are we starting to see any impact on the amount of council tax coming in? Because that's one of the ways that we get a significant part of our revenue costs coming in and our income. So that would usually be the first sign if that was slipping. Even though we may recover it later on, it still gives us some challenges ahead.
Thank you, Chris.
Yep, on the interest rates, we as members are aware, we've been taking out sort of rolling 12-month borrowing to renew, to allow us to not be tied into such high rates for longer than we need to be. They rose significantly throughout last year. We're now being able to go out to the market, refinance. Apologies, couldn't get the right word out there. And those rates are lower than what we took out this time last year. And as you can see in the forecast provided by Link, they're expected to fall again over the next couple of years, although that has a lot of external factors that we can't control. And it's not until we get to we'll continue with fairly short-term borrowing, 1 to 2 year, until we get down to a level that we think we can tie, it's appropriate to tie the council into any longer term borrowings at those lower rates. I don't think I can answer the council tax ones because it's not the council tax query, because it's not an area I directly deal with, but I do report on it.
Jane, can you pick up the council tax point?
I think I missed a little bit of it. Could Councillor Chris set it up again for me, please?
Obviously, if we've got a cost of living crisis still continuing, have we noticed any impact on the amount of council tax take that we are collecting? Because that obviously then impacts upon our position going forward, and that's usually one of the first signs that if people are struggling, they'll drop a bill, and then we may collect it at a later point in time, but it still gives us a situation that we're uncertain of that money and that income coming in.
Thank you, Councillor Chris. And yes, we have seen a slight drop in council tax collection rates. We are not alone in that. I think across Wales, we have seen a very slight dip in terms of those collection rates. You are right. Sometimes it takes us a little longer to recover. So it is about seeing it more than just in the year itself, because we continue to pursue that debt as we go forward. So we are very mindful of that. We keep a close review on it. In terms of supporting our residents in that respect, we do have a money advice team. It is not a team that is a statutory requirement for local authorities. We have invested in that team with some grant funding that we've been able to draw on to bolster the numbers that can take calls and help our residents. So we appreciate the value that people hold with that service as well. So the grant funding will cease at the end of this calendar year, and we're already looking at ways and means by which we can maintain a level of service or provision there for our residents moving forward, because as you've rightly said, you know, we are still in the middle of that cost of living crisis and will be for some time. So we're trying to do everything we can to support people in that way.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks, Councillor Chris. Councillor Pete, you wanted to come back, and then absolutely the last question on this item is John.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, and thanks, Jane. Yeah, and sorry, I won't try and drag it out. And I'm not trying to necessarily be a pain or pedantic, but being a simple guy, I just need some clarity and not confusion. And again, I'm sorry, James, when I just look at that paragraph 311, it quite clearly states, and I quote, costs remain considerably higher than prior to the cost of living crisis. So for me, when I read that, you know, that implies to me the cost of living crisis is over. But I guess bearing in mind your interpretation point, I just wonder if we could seek to find a way going forwards to have a bit more clarity in our reports, so as we don't have to try and interpret them, please.
Thanks very much, Councillor Pete. Yeah, I'm sure that officers will look to the drafting going forward. And John Brottingham.
Thank you.
Councillor David, I did say that John was going to have the last word on this. Is it a question or a comment, please?
It was just a brief comment, but I can leave it. It's not important.
Right. Well, I'll bring you in fairness, you haven't had much airtime yet, so I'll bring you in. John.
Yeah,
John first, and then I'll absolutely. Councillor David Thomas has the last word on this item.
Thank you, Chair, for squeezing me in. I saw I put my hand up so late. My question is around the sundry debts, and thank you very much, Jane and James, for actually including this now in the Treasury Management Report. I see that the debt has increased over the first quarter by some £850,000. I also see that more than half of that is down to highways. And I also see that if I look at the trend line, it's almost consistently upwards. Is it something we should be concerned about?
Quickly come in, Chair, if you're happy for me to do so. I think we do see peaks during the year, depending on when invoices are raised. And I know particularly for highways, there will be, but this you're talking about more historic debt, I think, aren't you, John, rather than the up-to-date debt?
I'm talking about the chart that's on page 172, which shows highways that's sort of steadily going upwards. There's peaks and troughs and ups and downs on most of the others, but the highways is steadily going upwards, and it's rather a large figure.
I don't know, James, if you know. I know we would have a lot of catch-up invoices go out at year end. Now, whether that's impacting on the Q1 figures, but I think probably to give you a more responsive answer, we probably need to go away and look at it and provide you some more detail.
Yeah, that's fine. I think it'll do for the next quarter, but you know, it's something I think we need to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Could we make sure that we have a little paragraph that sort of addresses John's point, please, in the next quarterly report? Would be very, very helpful. Right, Councillor David, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very, very brief observation on the discussion that we've been having around the cost of living crisis and the impacts of interest rates and inflation. I think it's just worth bearing in mind that the Bank of England MPC is sitting next week to take a decision on the current level of interest rates at 5.25%. And what's going to be a major determinant in that is the actual level of service inflation and pay inflation. And both are sitting respectively at 5.1% and 5.7%. So it's going to be very, very evenly balanced, I think, within that committee as to whether they do accept that an interest rate might be on the cards, so to speak. So I think the cost of on that basis, I think the cost of living crisis is certainly still with us. That's the point I'm trying to make. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that intervention. It is a salutary reminder, Councillor David. Thank you very much. I'm going to move us on to the agenda item 13, which is the strategic risk report. And I think Bets is with us. I think.
I am, yes.
Oh, you are. Hello, Bets. You're very welcome.
Oh, good morning. Good morning.
Can you assume that everyone has read the report, please? And just focuses in on any items where things have changed or that are of particular that in your view really need to particularly to be brought to the committee's attention, and then we'll open it to the floor to give members the opportunity to make comments and question. Please, thanks, Beth.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So as the Chair's just mentioned, I'm taking it as read that you've all had time to read the report. So I'm just going to mention a few points. As at the end of Q4 2023-24, there are 13 risks on the strategic risk register, and the full detail of progress against each of these risks and controls can be found in Appendix A. Appendix B presents the results of the quarter's risk assessment process visually, and you can see there that 7 of the residual rated risks sit in the upper right-hand quadrant of the heat map. You'll also note that during Q1, 1 risk has changed its risk rating, and further detail can be read under section 3.5. However, I do know that there's been a question over the residual being higher than the inherent. This is rare, but it can happen. So just for a refresh, inherent risk is the risk rating when the risk is first identified before any controls have been put in place. Residual is the risk with the controls in place to date. So essentially the risk as it stands today, which for this report was at the end of Q4. And as stated in the reasoning as to why it changed, concerns significantly increased regarding the national team's progress, timescale and procurement approach. And this did affect the risk as of the point in time being the end of Q4, and the likelihood did change significantly compared to the original inherent. So moving on, the council upgraded its risk management software in March 2024. And also we've introduced new risk management training, which is bookable via Trent. And extra dates have been added due to the demand, which is fantastic. And the feedback to date has been excellent, which is even more fantastic. Finally, the recommendation can be read under point 10, so I'm not going to go through that in any detail. And as I'm sure you'll say, Chair, we welcome it. Jane and I welcome any questions.
Thanks very much, Bet. I'll just take Chair's prerogative here. The query from me on WCCIS. Generally speaking, I think the WCCIS risk is a matter of real concern. So I'm not expecting necessarily Jane or Bets to answer in detail today, but I think the committee needs to have more briefing on the way forward for WCCIS, because it seems to be a perennial issue, and to see it getting worse is really a matter of significant concern. And my other point, while I'm speaking, is I'm wondering about the need. Jane, I guess this is really for you to take to discussion at CLT initially, but is there a risk in the sustainable power space that perhaps needs to be articulated in the strategic risk register? But I'll leave it at that for now. Jane, come in if you wish.
Yeah, I won't come in on the sustainable powers. I can take that away. But I think in terms of the WCCS, I can't get the acronym, that one. It is having a lot of focus at senior leadership team at the moment. And I know we are coming close to a position where we will have a clear plan in place in terms of managing the way forward on that. So I'm not sure where we are in the approval process of things, but I think it is going to very much be in a position where we can manage it more effectively, with an outcome being provided now in terms of how we go forward with it. So it has had a lot of focus, but we are just about getting to a really good position in terms of going forward with it.
Thanks very much. And I take some assurance from that, Jane, and whilst it's not the role of this committee to delve into the detail of the solution, etc., but it is the role of this committee to have full assurance that the solution and the way forward is robust in terms of service delivery and data protection and services to the authority. So it would be helpful to be given a stronger level of assurance within the coming months. But thanks very much for that interim commentary, Jane. I'm going to bring in Councillor Chris and then Councillor Pete.
Yes, Chair. I mean, I was going to flag up the same issue because this has been raised not only in this committee but in others as well. We've been provided with some reassurances in the past that there were some different platforms that we were going to see, and we haven't seen those. But to me, it's the impact now happening on the front door and to our children's services, which give me real cause for concern. And the question is that if information can't be inputted into this system, which helps with the continuation of care across the board, it's the cost implications then of trying to catch up on this backlog. And are we doing any work to seek readdress on that system, because this is something that's, I believe, is outside of our control, but it is a real worry and needs to be escalated as a matter of urgency. So I welcome James' commentary that this is being looked at a higher level.
Thanks very much, Chris, and you put it much more cogently than I did. Yeah. So we kind of need to know it's going to be okay, because this is a real concern.
It
is. Councillor Pete.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Bets, for the report. I was looking on page 208 in my pack is the identified risk around the council being susceptible to higher levels of fraud as people struggle with the cost of living crisis. And I was looking at things like the last review and our controls and actions, and they appear to sort of focus on our own internal training and internal fraud policies. And I don't think any of those, with the greatest respect, would stop a fraud if external individuals can't afford to pay the council tax. So I was just musing on whether a sort of better additional action to have would be to look at ways of reducing council tax to affordable levels through sustainable powers and focusing on what people need. This would reduce then the need for individuals to commit fraud, as council tax would reduce to affordable levels, which I guess is especially relevant in respect to this ongoing cost of living crisis that Councillor David has alluded to. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Can I come in, Chair? Yeah, I'm not going to comment on the political decision around setting council tax levels. That's not for me. That's for council in terms of approving the budget. What I would say, though, is in terms of the council tax set, it isn't an individual item on its own. It has to be considered alongside our ability to deliver the services that help people through their lives as well. So I just wanted to make that comment, but I'm not going to go into the political debate around levels of council tax, as you would expect.
Thank you, Jane. Bets.
I just wanted to add, you know, following on from the WCCIS a discussion, just to say that, of course, we are in the middle of Q1 at the moment. So I'm actually taking the Q1 Strategic Risk Register report to SLT this afternoon. So that will feature the progress since Q4 will feature as part of that report for SLT and CLT this afternoon.
Thanks, Bets, and then that will come to us in September.
Actually, it'll be a little bit longer because, unfortunately, because of the summer break, it doesn't go to informal cabinet till early September, and of course there's the knock-on. But it's as soon as, I think it goes to informal cabinet something like the 3rd of September, so it's as soon as you have G&A afterwards.
Right, okay. Okay. I think perhaps even if we don't have the next quarter of the risk register in September, we would need just a bit of assurance somehow on WCCIS, please. Councillor David and then Councillor William.
Can I just say something very briefly on the council tax question, Chair? Cabinet obviously haven't made any decision with regard to what level council tax we're going to set for the 25-26 budget. There is a modelling figure within the FRM, but that it'll depend exactly, you know, ultimately on the level of settlement we get from Welsh Government and our ability to deliver services, valued services to our residents. So that's some way off yet. But I would just add that within that settlement, there is an element for council tax reduction scheme, and we actually add some of our own finance to that, and that does go some way to protect the most vulnerable residents in the county with regard to levels of council tax. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor David. Thank you very much. Councillor William.
Thank you, Chair. That was very useful update from the cabinet member just then. I just wanted to, first of all, to endorse your comments in the opening remarks around the desirability of revisiting the risk register in the context of the delivery of and the rollout and the buy-in for sustainable powers. I think that's not something that we can take as a given, and we
we've just lost.
Sorry, I just realised. Have I been muted all the time?
No, we could hear you to start with, and then we lost you.
Okay, I have no idea what happened just then. I just wanted to endorse your comments in your opening remarks around sustainable powers and the necessity really of revisiting the register in that context, because I think that's really important. And the other thing I just want to reflect on is that we as members need to be while conscious of the wider economic environment, cost of living, and so on, we need to be cautious in the way we articulate our thoughts around the council tax levels and reduction of council tax in the context of bearing down on fraud, because I think there's a danger that could be misinterpreted. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor William. Thank you. I had Councillor Graham. I'll go to Councillor Graham first, Jane, and then I'll bring you in last if I can. Councillor Graham.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just very quickly, I'm a little bit concerned about one item on the risk register in regard to social care. If there's insufficient capacity to respond to the longer term demand in adult services in a timely manner, and that we have an inherent number of 25, which residual is reduced to 9. That doesn't reflect to me the feeling out in the community. There are many horror stories that we will all have seen recently reported where people are unable to return to home from hospitals because of a lack of social care. And I'm sure every county councillor has received the same information from members of their community. So I'm a little surprised to see that the number has reduced so much. And perhaps I'm not sure whether anybody here today is able to answer that question as to why it is reduced so much and why we are so confident that the problem is almost, by that record, almost disappeared, when it certainly hasn't in my own experience.
Thank you, Councillor Graham. Bets, are you able to offer anything, or do we need to make? Or Jane, can you? Right. Okay, I'll bring Jane in. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. I think there was just a couple of things I wanted to pick up on. One was the WCCC. I'm having trouble with that one this morning. Yeah. We will get a report to committee in September, providing you with more detail around the actions we're taking to manage that risk. I think that will be appropriate. Yeah. From a social care perspective, Councillor Graham, I'm not able to give you a full response today, and I don't think we have anybody with us from the service that would be able to give you a much better response. So perhaps we can look at that and reflect on that and take something outside the meeting to give you the assurance you're seeking as to why that risk is considered in terms of that rating, if that's acceptable. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Graham, and thanks, Jane. Perhaps also in Bets covering paper for the next strategic risk register, that point could also be addressed, just so that the committee understands the rationale behind reducing that one, picking up on Councillor Graham's remarks. If the covering paper could just address that point, it would help us with our understanding. Thank you very much. I'm going to move us on to take items 14 and 15. So we are looking at the annual governance statement and the council's annual self-assessment, and Catherine is here to support our consideration of this. I would just like to register my thanks to Catherine and her team for facilitating the informal seminar that we had on this business as well earlier in the week, where we had a thorough review of matters, but it's equally important that our formal consideration takes place here today. Catherine would like us to take these items together for ease of discussion and consideration, and I've agreed to that. So Catherine, over to you.
Thanks, Lynn. So yes, the annual governance statement and annual self-assessment have both been brought forward together as they're both interlinked, and they support our legislative requirements under Part 6 of the Local Government and Elections Act. So there's the need to review that we as a council are exercising our functions effectively, using resources economically, efficiently and effectively, and to show and evidence the extent to which the governance is effective for securing the above. So it's important to note that this year we have developed an annual governance framework in collaboration with officers from across the organisation. And this is on page 227 of the pack. And this underpins the annual governance statement, or often called AGS itself, and sets out the processes, systems, records and responsibilities across the organisation. So the annual governance statement allows us to demonstrate the extent to which governance is effective, and we base this upon best practice from CIPFA, or the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, as well as SOLIS. And we look to provide an overall assessment of assurance, as well as assurance levels against each of the 7 principles, with accompanying supporting evidence. So the assurance levels were based on information that we received from officers at Cabinet Corporate Leadership Team, as well as valuable feedback as well from Governance and Audit Committee. So overall, the assurance level provided for the organisation is reasonable. And on page 334 of the packs, you can see that against each of the 7 principles, there are assurance levels for each of them as well. In terms of the council's self-assessment, we've got a rigorous process in place and has been for a number of years, and that resulted in a significant amount of reflection and challenge across all services. And this feeds into our future improvement actions, which are all contained within both reports. Governance and audit have been a key part of this again. And as Lynn mentioned there, we've had a valuable private seminar earlier this week, which was attended by members of Cabinet and Corporate Leadership Team, as well as the committee itself. The self-assessment report provides an overview of the Council's performance against the 2023-24 Corporate and Strategic Equality Plan, which is called Stronger, Fairer, Greener, and it details how we rate ourselves as a council against the plan, which has been in its first year. So whilst I'm not going to go into the document pack verbatim, as it is very detailed, overall, Cabinet considered the degrees of ambition as defined by the Wellbeing of Future Generations Journey Tracker that had been displayed were, so for Objective 1, it was defined as being more adventurous, meaning that we feel we're stepping out of a business as usual mindset, can't even speak, and acting to change how things are currently done, signalling early progress to wider change. For Objective 2, it was assessed as being owning our ambition. So this is similar to being more adventurous, but with initiatives developing, more people becoming involved, and it included taking well-managed risks and reaching out to other sectors and collaborating beyond our traditional partners. And Objective 3 was also categorised as owning our ambition. So there are various supporting documents, as you will have seen, providing detail to the self-assessment. So the appendices highlight how our work is contributing towards the wellbeing goals. It shows our performance against the supporting measures over the year, as well as an engagement summary and information on how we are working more sustainably. It's been a busy year, as evidenced in all of the documents. However, there have been many developments which have enhanced our governance, most notably the framework that sits behind the annual governance statement. So today, I'd like to seek endorsement of the annual governance statement ahead of final approval at governance and audit in the autumn, alongside the statement of accounts, as well as endorsement of the self-assessment before it goes to Cabinet on Tuesday, the 1st of August for approval. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you very much, Catherine. I'll open the floor to members to seek any points of clarification or assurance and ask any further questions. There seem to be none. No, there are, thank goodness. Councillor Graham.
Well, it isn't a question, Chair. It's just to say a big thank you really to Catherine and her team for what is a really comprehensive report, which has taken some trawling through over the past week, I can assure you, by us all. So a big thank you to you for this, which is really, really helpful.
Thank you very much, Councillor Graham. You've taken the words out of my mouth, so thank you for saying that. I certainly felt that whilst the documents are weighty and thorough, I felt that they are becoming increasingly accessible and relatively easy to read. So I would also echoing Councillor Graham's points, pay tribute to the team for the work that's been done on the way that the documents are framed, because they are becoming accessible and easy to read and understandable, albeit they still by definition are lengthy and extremely comprehensive. So thank you for that. I've got a couple of questions, but I'll leave the floor open to colleagues before I come in. No. I'll come in with my brief comments. One of the comments I had in the self-assessment, which I think would be worth just considering, Catherine and Connor, is it states in the self-assessment that the status of the wholesale service design in the context of sustainable powers is on track. And I think it would help the committee just to understand a bit about how we demonstrate that it's on track. I mean, don't get me wrong, I recognise that a lot of work is ongoing, and members, including lay members, have had the opportunity to attend seminars recently. But it would help us just to understand what does on track mean in this context, because sustainable powers is such an important and significant ambition for the council in terms of community-facing services, and critical for us to confidently meet our statutory financial responsibilities going forward. So it's that two-pronged thing. It's about our communities, end of, but it is also about our statutory financial responsibilities going forward. So I think testing and understanding what on track means in that context is really important. If someone could help me out there. Jane, if you would like to, and then after Jane, I'll bring in John Brottingham.
I think, Chair, I totally understand what you're asking for, because it is difficult to have that assurance when you've got nothing tangible in front of you to see. But I think this programme itself, it's not an individual project. It is about a wholesale programme. It is about a culture. It is about the way we operate business. It's about the involvement of our community. So it is, it's a significant piece of work, and that will be noted in terms of the time that we've put in already to get us to where we are now. What you will be able to see as we develop further on this, and I think you've had some sessions as councillors looking at the development of that work, and I hope that gives you a level of assurance that things are progressing. But what we will have is a programme that will clearly align the individual elements of that Sustainable Powers programme and how they will come forward as proposals for distinct decision making, consultation, and all of those things that fit into that overall process. So we are developing that now as we have more information to be able to populate a plan as such that will give you that level of assurance you're seeking. And of course, we do have the statutory deadlines imposed upon us from a financial perspective as well. So we'll clearly want to bridge that budget gap and be able to put a balanced budget forward to council in March. So clearly there are those statutory deadlines as well. But I think once you see this wider plan that is now being brought together, that will still have governance of individual elements of it at a different level and in different means. But absolutely, I'm hoping that will give you the clarity and assurance that you're seeking.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks. That's much appreciated. I'm going to bring in John and then Gareth, and then I'll give you the final word, Catherine. So John, then Gareth, then Catherine. Thank you, Chair.
I'm referring to page 452 of our main pack, which talks about the staff survey. It's generally good news, but there's one figure in there which goes against the trend, and it says there's an 18% decrease in the number of staff who think the Powys County Council is a place where all employees are respected, included and valued. That seems an extraordinary jump. Is there a particular reason for it?
Can anyone answer that?
I don't have an answer to hand, John, but it is something that we can take away. And as James mentioned on other points, report back to you.
It just goes against the trend. It goes against the rest of the report. You know, it seems a very odd figure.
Okay.
Worrying if it's true.
Okay. Yeah, Jane, jump in. If
Just in on that one, we've undertaken a survey more recently, and I think what you will see on that is that it is an improving picture across that particular headline. So I think at an individual service level, we're very conscious and to want to understand where we are seeing that, and it may well be specific to circumstances in a particular service area or hence, but I know we have seen an improvement across many of those results now in the most recent survey that we've undertaken, and that's really pleasing to see, because I think we're seeing a shift in the culture across the organisation and more engagement with staff more generally as well, and I think that's helping in terms of the improvement that we're seeing coming through. But you will see more information on that, obviously, and with the results of the survey that we've just done.
Look forward to it. Thank you, Jane.
Thanks for jumping in there, Jane. Thank you very much. Gareth, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to, you mentioned about sustainable powers being on track, and Jane's response about the plan that's been developed. What I would like to see in this statement is something much more explicit about how the council has been mindful of its governance obligations in getting out of the traps early in tackling these financial issues. Some councils are almost turning a blind eye to it. So I think a statement in there up front, rather than in a footnote that sustainable powers is on track, if it could be part of the headline that the council has recognised early on, it's got to get to grips with this budget shortfall, and in doing so has to come about with what will be some very profound decisions, which will be very much evidence-based and based on wide-ranging consultation.
Thank you, Gareth. Jane, I take it, I'm assuming that that's a welcome comment and a welcome observation.
Absolutely. And I think we've got an updated medium-term financial plan report going to Cabinet next week. In fact, Finance Panel are considering that this afternoon. And I think within that, it's very clear that sustainable powers is going to be the main driver and the main means of delivering a sustainable and financially resilient council. But absolutely, I'll be teasing out those elements as part of that report as it works its way through as well. So yes, appreciate that comment and the need to take that on board.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Gareth. Thanks, Jane. And final word on this to Councillor Gareth.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, just carrying on from that from Gareth. I think, yeah, spot on. I totally agree with that, but obviously we need a health warning with that as well, because obviously there are going to be some political decisions around this, and obviously some of the savings are going to be longer term later on down the line. So whilst I appreciate the sustainable powers, there are going to be lots of hurdles we're going to have to cross politically to be able to deliver that, and some that will be publicly supportive, and some that will be publicly sensitive, and there'll be objections to, and how we manage that. And obviously the communications and the things will drag the timelines out on these savings. So whilst I agree, we also need to put in the health warning that this is not going to be a steady ship, a steady line that we're going to go down around the decisions we're going to have to make as a council.
Thanks, Councillor Gareth. That's a point well made. I mean, this is hard yards, and I'm confident that everyone in this virtual room absolutely recognises the hard yards, and will best endeavours work for the interests of the people of Powys, as they always do. But yeah, it's hard work, and I think everyone's comments are well intentioned and well made. So thank you very much. I'm going to move us into Catherine. Oh, Catherine, I was giving you the very last word. Is there anything you want to say in closing?
Thanks, Lynn. No, just to say that obviously we have another briefing with county councillors on Monday evening to recap on where, you know, what they've had so far over the fortnight, and that proposals would be going to Cabinet for consideration in the autumn.
Okay, well, thank you for your 2 papers today, and thank you to you and Connor and the wider teams for all the work that goes into preparing them. And I think we've received and considered and are supportive of the documents, albeit with some caveats and anticipation of more detail coming forward in the future. Moving us on to the work programme, I'll really just pause there for any comments or additions that colleagues wish to make at this stage. Pete, Councillor Pete.
Yeah, thanks, Jan. I just quickly, I just wondered if for information we should include the subcommittee meetings on there.
Yeah, Councillor Pete, thanks for raising that. Because one of the things I've been going to mention just at this point is respecting the fact that the team have been very, very, very busy, and that Carrie-Anne, who's with us today supporting Kath, has only really joined us in the past month or so. It would be good now that the pre-election period is finished to get some programme of dates in the diary for our working groups, and as Pete suggests, to schedule them into the work programme for visibility, because not all members serve on the working groups, so it would be helpful. So thanks for that, Pete. I agree with your request. Apart from that, it looks fairly comprehensive to me. Yep. In that case, I will formally close the meeting, our July meeting, and thank all officers and elected members for their contributions and their work that go into this meeting, and of course thank my lay member colleagues as well. So thank you very much, and our next formal meeting will be in September. So thank you very much, and we'll close the meeting now.